Welcome to the Off the Road Again podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Ross.
And I'm Dan.
I always point the wrong way and literally record. Like last week I was trying to point down to the other people and it was literally.
Well, which way is west in your house? Right at the screen. Perfect. Right?
Oh, that way.
You're probably due west.
No, that way.
Ross doesn't know where
my bears are. No.
As always, we have been socially distanced since before it was mandated because I'm in the Midwest, Ross is in the Northeast, and Dan's West Coast.
Yes, West Coast, SoCal.
Nice.
Where in SoCal? Oh, in OC.
OC.
Oh, no. Isn't OC hoity-toity, or am I wrong?
Not everywhere, no.
Okay.
There's parts of it that are.
I could be completely wrong then. It's fine.
It's pretty hit or miss.
I come from a ridiculous county here in Kansas that everybody, when they come visit, they're like, oh, why is this here? I was like, I don't know, but a Rolls is not out of place here. There are Lambo sightings for me 3 times a year. Not crazy frequent, but
wow.
Yeah, it's an odd county for the middle of the Midwest.
Money's got to land somewhere.
Yeah. So let's jump right into it. It was kind of a slow 4x4 news thing. And then Lexus was just like, here, look at one of our trucks with a bunch of parts added to it.
That's really what it is. LX 570 with slew of everything the Overlander would pretty much dream of putting on it.
Don't forget the name. It's the J201 concept.
Okay.
Concept being the key word.
Yep.
Yes. So it's a one-off.
Right.
Just like that sweet Lexus GX. Did they call it the Overland?
Black and orange one from a couple of years ago.
No, they showed it at Ore, I think, at the FJ Cruiser event.
Oh, Summit?
Oh, yeah.
The FJ Summit?
FJ, yep. I think it was the GXO something.
GXOR? Was it just GXOR?
Right. GX Off-Road. Yeah, see, we just figured it out.
Pieced it together.
And I'm still Googling. I'm so behind.
That's okay. That's okay. By now everybody's seen it. But the crux of this quote unquote concept is basically throw a supercharger on, Icon suspension, general tires, some armor, and
the GX.
Ish. That looks
That's the
good.
GX.
Yeah. The F Sport wheels are strange, but as Dan has pointed out, some of the CNET article is not totally accurate. Not to throw shade or say anything about CNET.
Hey,
can you go
check
put clothes on? Okay, great.
Awesome.
This show brought to you by Chris's family.
What else is new?
So
she's having a
they're
great time
quoting.
tonight.
Yeah, seriously, she just loves the J201 that much.
Yep.
I think we'd let her ride in it. We definitely let her ride in it. So this is the J201. Definitely
would.
There it is.
Which looks almost exactly like the GX I just had up there.
Well, you have that spindle grill, and they've done similar things to disguise it and make room for a winch.
Yes.
It is interesting. The winch placement. It seems.
Does it seem up
it
and
seems
in?
Low.
Oh, you think it's low?
I think
there's a whole lot of grill that's been cut away because it normally hangs down quite low. So they've actually put it up as high as they can manage it.
Yeah, to me, it looked high to me.
Yeah.
Really?
But that's just because I think the front end of an LX is very rough to look at. So this is an improvement to me.
Not the best angle. Yeah.
Well, have you seen? I put one on my ramp in my most recent video, so you can see the grill in all its glory, the before state before they started cutting it up like that.
So the ramp. So just to give some background for the audience, many of you probably know who you are. So you're an extremely experienced and storied, both professional on the manufacturer side and also later on in the journalism side. And the ramp you're referring to is, Chris, ready for this? Did Chris freeze? Chris is frozen. He's going to come back in warp speed. The ramp that you have is something that most likely any and all off-roader would be ecstatic to have. You have an RTI ramp at your disposal.
Yep. And, I went looking for one and I couldn't find one. So I designed it and went down to Industrial Metal Supply and bought the steel. Brought it home in a Honda Odyssey minivan, because you can do that with a minivan. Lock and key, 10-foot pieces. And gave some guy a case of beer to weld it together for me.
Nice.
The only thing I can't do fab-wise is the welding.
The unofficial barter for the automotive world with your friends is, have a case of beer for this. Come over and help me. Have a case of beer.
Yeah, I cut the pieces, and he it was about a couple hours and it was done. But so that was the way I did it. Is I designed my own.
It's an excellent tool to have at your disposal, because there is no direct equivalent of like Nürburgring times for off-roaders. I mean, if there was, it would be, probably like the Rubicon or Moab or something. But the RTI scale is kind of like the 0 to 60 measurement for sports cars.
Yeah,
would you say?
I think, obviously approach angle, departure angle, those things are easy to measure, easy to visualize, but this is really, suspension, articulation, and flex. That'll determine, if you can get through an obstacle, or you're going to be teetering with your wheels spinning, then you might have to put on a diff lock, or maybe you've got some tricky electronic traction control that works off-road, but that often doesn't do exactly what you want, and some of the older rigs don't have that stuff.
And mechanical stuff is mechanical. It has mechanical failures, but electronic stuff has its own process going on. But the RTI is kind of, and Chris is producing in some pictures of a RAV4 adventure, and it's not
RAV4.
That's
not
I had to dig a little bit.
Performance.
I had to dig a little bit to find the ramp.
But yeah, the RTI scale, I mean, flex ultimately is where an off-road vehicle finds its limit in most cases. It's not usually like an incline or a decline that brings out the maximum capability. It's usually flex and the limited ability to put power down and touch and move the vehicle forward. So you've built a hell of a tool.
Where the Heritage Edition is a much more impressive ramp.
Yeah.
How
did you feel about the Heritage?
I like that vehicle quite a bit. I mean, it's going to be similar to the LX, except, the LX in the video, you'll see that it won't go nearly as far up because of its bumper design mainly.
Really?
Didn't the bumper just impact the ramp?
Before you can, well, see, this is the thing, is you talk about the concept vehicle we just looked at, and its bumper's all cut away. And it's also sitting higher, and everybody talks about the Icon suspension, but if you look at that really closely, it's got the stock springs and the stock hydraulic struts at the corners, and it's got an Icon upper control arm and an Icon lower locating arm in the rear, but it's got spacers that, if you read carefully in the video captions, it says OE spacer. So there's really just a spacer to lift it up, and then they've posed it in low mode with the suspension cranked up as high as it will go, because that car comes stock with a adjustable height suspension. And that gets to the ramp. If you want to do well on the ramp and you have an adjustable height suspension, high mode is not your friend. Because if you put more pressure in your air springs, the LX, it's hydraulic, but it's the same principle, you make them stiffer and they don't compress as much. That's why the vehicle goes up. You've made the suspension stiffer so that the weight of the car can't compress it as far. And so when you drive on the ramp, it won't go up as far. And here you can see, there is the LX on the left with its big hairy grill in the
That's one way to put it.
It is a huge grill.
Yeah, well, this has
It's
also got
the
sport package, right? So it's supposed to look like it's got, I don't know, a splitter. You'd have to ask them. But this, I couldn't get up the ramp in normal height mode. So I had to raise the vehicle, which stiffens the suspension, which means it doesn't compress as much on the compressed side, and that means it doesn't go up the ramp as far. So if you look at the picture on the right, there's 2 pieces of blue tape. There's about an 8-inch difference between the two, and that's kind of down to the grill forcing me to use high mode to clear the ramp.
Okay.
So yeah, it's all kind of interconnected.
It's also kind of counterintuitive because the average person, if you described it to them or just threw them in it and said you're going off-road, push a button and get yourself, where it needs to be, they would probably go, oh, highest mode is the best mode.
Well, it is if you want to clear something, but if you want flex over a frame twist obstacle, no, it's not, because now you've kind of bound up the suspension by raising it to the point where it won't flex as much. And, it was funny. I noticed this when I went to Moab. We did a side trip to Elephant Hill in Jeep Grand Cherokees that had air suspension. They were introducing the diesel. So what would that be, 2014 or
14 or so? Yeah, WK2.
Yeah.
And air suspension's what, Quadratec 2?
It's
on, yeah. It's a number.
So anyway, I noticed that, the PR person who was riding shotgun with me was lowering it and raising it and lowering it and raising it at different times, trying to get it in the best configuration for whatever we were doing at the time. And, but this applies to a Land Rover or an LR4 or any of those products. In their high mode, they don't flex as well. In their lower mode, they flex better. And it's pretty significant. It's like 100 points, score of 450 might go to 550.
Substantial.
Ross, you're going to love this next image.
Okay. Are you making a jab about the roof rack?
Oh, wow. Roof rack. Yeah. Dan was able to get it off where you couldn't get it off.
They didn't give me the keys. It was locked to the roof, and they didn't provide the keys.
The keys were there. I had to find them.
Really?
They were there somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, I had the white one that was floating around. So maybe they pulled the keys off because they knew that everybody would be doing that.
So you've talked about the roof rack before, so we don't need to do that again, right?
We don't need to do that again. But staying on the Toyota topic, I really do want to touch on your Toyota experience and your influence and impact on Toyota. The Toyota's like what's in the background of your office right there.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I got out of Cal Poly Pomona and started working for the Department of Defense in San Diego.
Wow.
Whoa.
And I was working on
that's a gig.
Missiles and submarine stuff and all that, but one of my coworkers was racing, and I started going to the track to crew for him. And pretty soon I got my own car, and then I went through a series of cars. But I come from an automotive background. My dad built race cars for a living. He was the 1957 Indianapolis 500 Rookie of the Year.
Whoa. Wow.
And so I was kind of like chomping at the bit to get into the car industry, and I finally managed to get in at Toyota Technical Center, and that's one of the cars I raced. And after I retired it from racing, I took it and won a rallycross championship with it.
So Chris threw up a picture of the NA Miata, the famous NA. What was prior to that? What was in the rotation prior?
Well, before that, I had a Rabbit, which was an improved touring where I had Bilstein shocks and a whole bunch of stuff on it. And then I went to showroom stock and I raced a GTI.
Okay.
And then I got a second gen CRX.
Oh, wow.
And raced that. And then that was just for a year. Then I switched to a Civic Si. I was spending all my money on race cars. And basically one of them I drive on the street. The last year's car I would drive on the street, and the new one I would race. But I had Civics with roll cages on them in them, and before it was cool, and I think it's not cool anymore now again, but we've got over that but yeah, people were like, what are you doing with this car? But the CRX was my favorite.
Really?
It weighed less than 2,000 pounds.
I was going to say, was it less than the NA?
Yeah. The NA was pretty light though. So the NA came after the Civic Si. And then I had that for 3 or 4 years. Now that car, you said the famous Mazda, that is one of the 3 original Chicago Auto Show prototypes.
That's so cool.
Yeah, the red one and the blue one went into the press fleet, and that white one went to the training center so the mechanics could take it apart and learn about Miatas. And when they were done with that, I knew somebody at Mazda, and I ended up with it, and we were going to do a whole national race series. There was going to be 4 of us. It was going to be a 24. It was going to be the endurance series. I don't know what they called it at the time, the Escort Radar Detector Series or something like that. But
Escort
that fell
sponsor?
apart. They did, yeah. Go figure.
Yeah, right.
And that car ended up in my trailer when it all fell apart, and then I started racing it, and in SCCA, and that was the first Miata to win a race anywhere.
That's wild.
That's so
where does it live now?
It's in Mazda's basement museum. I restored it for the 20th anniversary, excuse me. Tried to get them interested in taking it off my hands because it was just going to get cobwebby again if it just sat in my garage. And they weren't that interested. And then just before the ND came out, the PR people said, "Hey, you still interested in letting us have that?" So
convenient.
So you probably might have seen it at the Chicago Auto Show when the ND was introduced. It was also at the SEMA show. It was at a couple of other places.
Is it the kind of thing, since you got basically a free car, you just kind of gifted it back to them?
Yeah, it was one of those deals where that was a $1 car.
Oh, yeah.
And, it was I never drove it on the street. I never titled it.
It was getting crushed if you didn't take it.
Yeah, it was one of those, although they had done the paperwork a certain way where they didn't have to crush their cars. I know some of them will import, it gets into weird stuff I don't understand. But anyway, they didn't have to crush it. And so they have all 3 of them back together now.
That's awesome.
That's insane. That's got to be like one of the rare situations where that happens.
It was bizarre. Yeah.
I'm hunting so hard for Toyota pre-runner pictures right now.
Yeah. So
I keep trying to match what's over Dan's shoulder.
Well, that's Ivan Stewart's racetrack. That's, but that plays into the pre-runner story. So anyway, I parlayed. Yeah, that's so awesome.
That holds so cool. Up. Even now, that is just the coolest looking thing. So
it's a good livery.
Tell us the pre-runner story.
So I, finally got a job with Toyota Technical Center, and left San Diego, moved to Torrance. But I knew that a proving grounds in Arizona that was going to be opened up even before I interviewed, because I think Auto Week had broken a story about it. So I brought it up in the job interview, and I don't know if that helped, but it certainly didn't hurt. So when that proving ground opened in April of '93, I was there. And so since there was a proving grounds, I had been early in my career when I first started. I was in this meeting with everybody in my group, and I'd come from road racing, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to work on the MR2. I'm going to work on the Supra. I'm going to do all this stuff because I'm a hot shit racing.
And there was a Celica then too.
Oh yeah, the Celica all truck. Oh, was I supposed to say? You'll have to put an E now that I've said that word.
E?
For explicit language. No.
Oh no, we're good. You're good. I put it either way.
So anyhow, so in the first couple of weeks I worked there, while we were still in Torrance, my boss asked the group of us. There's about 5 or 6 in my group. Anybody here tow a trailer? And I'm like, oh yeah, because I towed my race car everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like one of those war movies where they ask for volunteers and everybody steps back and there's one guy left, and it was me.
He's the new guy too,
and you're looking
right?
around like, oh
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I see how it is.
Exactly that. So okay, Edmunds, you're on the 970D project, which was the T100's code name.
Oh, really?
So I started working on the T100 before anybody knew what a T100 was.
Wow.
And went all through that development. And then when it got done, I got put on the Tacoma project, but the Tacoma project had already kind of gotten to a certain point. So I was assigned to do a special version with optional shocks. and they didn't really have a specific direction or idea. They just, Toyota Motor Sales wanted an option with off-road shocks. And so I pitched them on, you know, what shocks, we should do a tire, let me have springs front and rear, let's do this right. And that became the Tacoma TRD Off-Road package.
Wow.
And so I developed that package at Toyota Technical Center in Arizona.
What year was that?
93 or 4. I think the vehicle came out in 95. So the one I did was the extended cab version. The crew cab one came a year or 2 years later.
Right. Those were like 97, 98.
Yeah, something like that. The crew cab Tacoma came out a little slow. So yeah, it was great. And the weird part is nobody knew it was going to be called the TRD off-road package. So when that sticker appeared on the production versions, my boss joked, "Oh, that stands for that's really Dan." So that was kind of the joke in the office there for a little while.
That's a pretty great phrase.
Yeah, I mean, if that's you painting, you know, what you want out of it on the truck, then
there it is. That is.
It's not quite the TRD, but that's a 95 Tacoma with the cab.
That's that year, but it's not the TRD off-road package.
Yeah.
So
turns out those press photos are harder to dig out.
Yeah. So the pre-runner. So during this off-road package talk, I'm like, well, we should do a two-wheel drive version of this truck. But at the time, the two-wheel drive Tacomas were those really small, low ones.
Right, like
the Gardner
work trucks. Yeah.
The Gardner truck, as some people called them. And I'm thinking, no, you know, because I grew up in Southern California, you know, people had been lifting two-wheel drive Hiluxes forever and putting lift kits on them and, you know, 31-inch tires.
It's definitely not the right wheels and tire setup, but at least got a sticker on the back of it.
It's got the sticker and it's the right cab, and it's the right year because of the headlight shape. But
so one of the guys that I went to high school with had a black one with the TRD off-road package, and one night we were all over at a house, and he was like, yeah, go take it for a spin, man. I did not come home for at least 3 hours. Yeah, this was pre-cell phone, so like, who was gonna call me? Like,
gone.
Yeah, it was my truck for the night.
That's awesome.
So the package was suspension, and did you get tires too out of it? It
was front springs, rear springs, the Bilstein shocks, and we developed a tire with Michelin, BF Goodrich, same business card though. And then, to my surprise, and I really liked this, but it wasn't really my call because I was just the suspension tire guy, they added the Diff Lock, which I think is what really makes that product, you know, sing. That really gives it what it needs.
Cred, the actual, like, there's mechanical chops too.
Yeah, and, you know, it had the clearance, and you just needed that thing to get through those situations where you don't have quite enough suspension articulation to get over something. But in the process of all of that, it's like, hey, why don't we do a two-wheel drive one of these? And, you know, I worked with a lot of Japanese engineers because that truck project wasn't based in Michigan, it was based in Japan. So I was dealing a lot with the Japanese headquarters. And they just didn't quite get it, why we'd want to do it. But I said, well, you have a two-wheel drive version of the 4Runner. It's the same suspension. All you got to do is delete all the front drive gear and you're there.
It costs less. There's less parts.
Right. But they didn't really understand why anybody would want a TRD off-road package and two-wheel drive. So then I took them to the Parker off-road race, a bunch of visiting Japanese engineers. We went and watched Ivan Stewart race his two-wheel drive truck.
That's awesome.
And we showed Robbie Gordon going by in his two-wheel drive trophy truck and all that stuff. And the light went on. And pretty soon I had a prototype to work with. And,
oh, wow.
So then we went to, you know, the vehicle was introduced along with a 100 series Land Cruiser, I think, in Borrego Springs and Ocotillo Wells. You know, they used the there's a really cool hotel down there, Casa del Zorro, I think, that they sometimes do launches at. And the 100 series was the star, but the pre-runner was the appetizer, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so I was sent down there to set up the drive route for the journalists to drive. And,
and the pre-runner? Oh.
Yeah. So
what a great gig.
So I set up the course, and then, I had to leave when all the journalists came, because this was before they let any of the American staff engineers talk to anybody. And so, but Ivan came in, and I had to coach him up a little bit on what we had done, because he was going to speak about it.
Okay.
But he'd never seen it. And, but they put him in the position of, oh yeah, I helped with this, but actually, marketing, right?
Marketing, all marketing. He was just the face of the brand and the representative at that point.
Yep. Well, he was still winning races and all that,
I bet too.
So he was that.
There's also that.
So after that, I got a call from Ivan, and he's like, hey, we don't want that to happen again. So if you're doing something else, let me come to the proving ground, and we'll spend a couple of days. So when we got to that point with the TRD off-road package for the Tundra, we brought him out to Arizona and drove around our off-road course a couple of times. And, so he at least knew where we were at.
Right. And, right. Got a baseline on what to expect and what it really is at its core.
Yeah. And in the process of that, I got to go with him to pre-run the Baja 500, the whole course, 2 days, spend the night in Mike's Sky Ranch. He had an 80 series Land Cruiser that was jacked up 4 inches. And I was sitting in the back with Joe Bacall, who was my technician, who you may know that name because he went on to win Baja, but at the time
that sounds familiar too.
Working. Yep. He was working with me, wrenching. He was basically my designated technician to work during these.
As support.
He got to go too, and I could see the light go on in his eyes when he was on that pre-runner ride. And
so the best part of tying all this conversation together is Joe's been running a GX, or is this an LX?
It's an LX.
It's an LX.
So good. It? That's so full circle.
Oh my Joe.
Well, that was an LX.
And he won the 500 and the 1,000, I believe, in that vehicle in various different paint iterations with Paul Williamson as his co-driver, I think.
I like how the Oakley sticker, it looks like it's literally just there to help hold the bumper on. Like right there next to it.
It's a zip tie. Yeah.
It's one of those O-ring things that holds the bumper on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The quick release clips or whatever they are. So the other thing to tie this together is that Chris has an 80 series Land Cruiser. Probably not equipped to run Baja right now, but
it's got some decent Dobinson springs in it, but
they do make good stuff.
I don't think I could go jump it.
I had one myself.
An 80?
I put 100,000 miles on an 80. It was a 93 first year of the big engine.
The 1FZ FE.
Yeah, see, I would have remembered that some years ago, but now it's just the 4.5 with 7
exactly. The only reason I know it is I have to, when I look for parts, that's what I need to know. Timing.
Yeah, that was a sweet vehicle. I wish I still had it, but I traded it in for a minivan. So, when I was in the state you're in, Chris, right now with the kids running around.
If you're in the market, I have one and it is for sale. So we can talk later.
I'm past that point, so I'm looking for one again.
Yeah, you're in 4Runner land now, which I had a 2018, a 5th gen and a 4th gen, and Chris still has a 4th gen. So how are you enjoying, or hopefully enjoying, your 4Runner?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't, done anything to it yet. That's my most.
That's a debacle. Yeah.
Sorry
to hear about that.
Oh, it's not a big deal, but I haven't done anything with it yet, because of the YouTube channel I've started up. I haven't actually put together a video with it on the ramp yet. And I want to kind of do a before thing before I start building it. But I've got wheels in the garage that I'm going to use.
What'd you get?
I just have the TRD upgrade wheels.
The Pro wheels?
Yep, because they were really cheap. There was a 40% off sale about a year ago.
That was crazy. I still had my truck when that was out. I'm so sad I didn't do anything.
Well, I said, I need these, so I don't know when I'm going to use them, but I'm going to buy them.
At some point, they'll come in handy. I'm not hoarding. I know.
There's still people flipping those.
From when they bought them before.
Yeah. But
so you have a KDSS truck, right?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of that because of the articulation. You know, the whole problem when you're tuning an off-road vehicle is you want to have articulation, so you want tiny stabilizer bars so that it doesn't interfere with that. But then when you drive it on mountain roads, everybody gets sick. You know, I remember one of the first cars I drove when I took the job at Edmunds was an FJ Cruiser, and the FJ Cruiser has, you know, regular stabilizer bars, but they're kind of skinny. So it works pretty well off-road. But I remember taking it down S22, which is a tight road down into Anza Borrego from the San Diego area. And it was kind of uncomfortable to ride. So
I bet.
What KDSS does is let you have both, you know, big stabilizer bars for the asphalt and no stabilizer bars for off-road.
Which is ideal. Don't mind me looking for a picture. My 4th gen 4Runner did not have sway bars. They were completely removed by the previous owner. And by removed, I mean Sawzall to the links and just
I want to see
yanked off.
Yeah.
On the street, if you went into a corner tight enough, it would almost lean over on the bump stops to the point that my friends would pretend it was a roller coaster and like put their hands up in the air. But off-road, it was the flex was amazing.
Any chance it's in your Stormtrooper article?
I found a picture. I'm going to send it to you, Chris, via Slack because it's ancient technology of going between multiple places to send pictures. But it made it fantastic off-road. Like you said, you know, it would flex over anything.
Yeah.
The problem was that was where the good kind of ended. So KDSS is on the 5th gen 4Runner. What was on, there was what was
on the 4th gens?
X-Rius on the 4th gens? Was that similar?
That's for the limited, and that's a whole different ball game. And I haven't really played with one of those, to be honest, but it's completely different.
So my 4th gen has it, and the way I've referred to it is, at least I think the layman's terms is that the left rear is tied to the right front. Sure. And the right rear is tied to the left front, and they basically act as external reservoirs to the other side when they're. That's I think the idiot version of what I think is going on.
I'll have to get one. You know, the thing is for me, I haven't really looked at it because when I went to buy mine, I kind of took the limited off the list right off the top, only because, well, I mean, if you can pick one up used for a good price, I mean, why not? But the front bumper just doesn't have as much, at least on the 5th gen, doesn't have as good of an approach angle because it's styled differently. And, you know, I want to play with the suspension. And the nice thing about KDSS is it's completely independent of the springs and shocks. So I can do what I want with the springs and shocks, and the KDSS will still function as long as I don't lift it too much. Because really all it is stabilizer bars that are hydraulically linked to each other, but it doesn't involve the springs and the shocks. So I'm going to put, you know, a 2-inch lift on it with different springs and shocks, and the KDSS will be fine.
And go up to like a 285 or a true 33.
I think I'm going to get a 285, 77. Yeah, whatever it's 32.8 or whatever.
Yeah, 32.8, 32.9, depending on which manufacturer.
Yeah.
Chris, can you throw that other picture on? What's that?
I don't want to go too far because I think it's easy to overbuild. And, you know, these vehicles are really good stock. And, you know, really, I mean, even if I kept the tire size the same and didn't lift it, I'd be able to do 95% of what I want to do.
Oh, of course.
I want a little bit of extra just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that looks sweet.
So that was how much that it had more flex than that, but I don't have a picture of it.
Yeah.
That's no sway bar.
I understand why your friends pretended it was a roller coaster.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Especially on your Kirby Northeast roads.
Right.
Emergency maneuvers on the highway were terrifying.
I bet it fails the moose test.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Oh, no.
It'll hit the moose.
Yeah, it'll flip over and take the moose out upside down. The guy that bought it was actually shipping it to Haiti because they don't have any paved roads where his family is. So,
oh wow!
Hopefully that truck is serving a good life somewhere.
It should be. It should be.
So, so do you still have the Jeep, or is the Jeep gone?
I do. I have a Jeep. It's a 2-door JK. It's 2012, so it's the first year of the Pentastar V6, which is the motor you want. I mean, once you get to that motor in a JK, especially in a 2-door, you don't really need to worry about any kind of mods because it's got plenty of power.
It's like an 80 horsepower upgrade over the previous V6, isn't it?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, it went from like 230 to 300 or something, or 305.
I thought it was like 202 to 282. But
was it? Or maybe you could be right. Regardless,
I have weird numbers in my head sometimes.
Not enough to plenty, basically.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. A stock height 2-door JK with the Pentastar and the manual is actually like not fast under no circumstance because it can't be called fast, but it like kind of gets up and goes.
You don't really want to go too fast.
Oh God, it's terrifying.
I also agree to that statement.
So scary. Yeah, we had one of our Hooniverse co-writers was on, and he went cross country in his JK Unlimited, and he was like, "What did he say? He got up to like 85 or 87 or something, and it kind of he would hit joints on the highway, and it would like completely move independently, front and rear, and it's scary.
It would the wind was unsettling it so much that it would cause the rear end to lighten, and under cruise control he was getting wheel spin, so it was activating the traction control.
Traction and ABS were coming on at 85.
Like 80 miles an hour. The glory of that is it was Kansas, so
right.
Yeah,
the wind blows.
So yeah, I still got that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so you still have the JK and it's just hanging out?
It's still here. I'm going to sell it so I can basically finance what I want to do to the 4Runner.
To the 4Runner.
It's one of those things where I just don't have enough space and too many cars I'm paying insurance on, and I'm not driving it, and let somebody else have fun with it. The thing, it's a manual. It's got roll-up windows, but it started out as an Edmunds project vehicle, a long-term test vehicle that we decided we were going to mod up. And of course, I was the one who did all the mods on it. And at the end, it was one that they had bought. It wasn't a borrowed car from Jeep. So they had to sell it. And, the policy was to just sell it for, the basic value of the vehicle. So all the mods just didn't add anything to the transaction price at all. So it's got a 3-inch lift and winch and a different bumper, and then I've added, since I got it, rock sliders, front and rear lockers. I bought basically crate axles from a Rubicon that you could just buy
44s with
the 410s and the e-locker, and I just had to figure out how to wire it up and put a switch in there. And so it's pretty set up. It's like a Rubicon, except it's got roll-up doors, roll-up windows and manual mirrors and kind of a cheesy stereo. But it's
the way
JK.
Jeeps used to be.
When you see the JL and you look at a JK, it's like, wow, there's a huge difference here.
There is. I mean, there's still so much value in not necessarily a stripper JK, but even just a JK with the way you've built it with basic, good quality modifications is. You go on the internet and there's so many pictures and videos of guys on 37s and, still open diffs. And it's like, oh, okay. So, your first good climb, what happens versus sliders and lockers go a long way.
Yeah. And I only, I just did 33s on it because it's a 2-door. It's already got a great breakover angle. I think if you get a 4-door, you're kind of obligated to lift it and put bigger tires on it just because you don't want to drag the belly. And, the Gladiator takes that even another step, being as long as it is. So
school bus.
Okay. I'm kind of glad you brought up the Gladiator, because I had an odd moment the other day where it's been out for a while now. Like what?
Yeah.
It's year 2. It's
at least a year.
About a year. Yeah.
I literally the other day realized I don't like the Gladiator.
And the internet's going to bring pitchforks for saying that, but
well, I mean, it's not the hottest of hot takes. There are way worse things to say in the world.
Fair.
But like,
That's
just
fair.
I guess I should paraphrase with like, I don't like an unmodified Gladiator. If you put bigger tires on it and wheels, then it looks proportionally correct. But like, the cab is so small, the bed is so long, and on just the little tires, they look silly. I'm sorry.
Well, if you're looking at a Rubicon or a Mojave, I think you're nearly there.
Okay.
Because you're at 33s, and
the sports, though.
Yeah, it's kind of like those Tacomas, the 2-wheel drive Tacomas with the skinny tires.
The X-Runners.
Before they had pre-runners.
Yeah.
Yeah, those look kind of fun.
Interesting that you said that. So I went out to Pennsylvania on Saturday with my dad and my brother. And Chris, I shared with you the picture of what happened to my brother's wheel. Dan, so I'm more in the ATV world than anything else right now. And my dad has a Polaris RZR, my brother has a Can-Am Commander.
Nice.
And my brother blew up the wheel on the back right. Like, he thought he just blew the tire off the bead and was looking at it. And we started jacking it up, take it off. And there was like a large size hole in the wheel. That happened. And probably within the first 7 minutes of being in the woods. And it was like a perfectly flat and beautifully scenic place to change a tire, which kind of worked out. But in the parking lot, there was a Gladiator, and this place it's trucks and ATVs, mostly on the same trails. Some of them are specific to one or the other. And incidentally, I've driven my 4th gen 4Runner on the exact same trails as the ATV trails. And it's the kind of place where, somebody will be next to you in like a 15-year-old, 2-wheel drive quad trying to get the floats right in the carb. And then the guy on the other side of you will be in like an ex-King of the Hammers truck, like getting ready to go out on the trails. And there was a Gladiator there, white Gladiator, lifted with this crazy bed rack contraption thing. And he was on 35s, and it was massive. Not just like big for a Jeep, but it was, there was a LJ. There was an LJ, a stretched LJ on 38s with probably 8 to 10 inches of lift, and this thing dwarfed it. And it's like, oh, you're going to take that on the trails, and your center of gravity is where? But it was enormous. I can't believe that people are actually wheeling these things on the trails like what Chris just posted. Good looking truck, but I can't get over it. It was fucking massive.
I like an LJ. I'd love to have an LJ.
LJs are the best.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah, khaki Rubicon LJ would be, now they're like 20 grand, but
yeah, if there's anything that will hold value in the Jeep longer than anything else, it'll be the LJs, because they're such a unicorn.
Seriously.
That's true.
Oh, stupid Jeeps.
Stupid Jeeps. So Dan, you have owned a few vehicles. What else other than that? Well, what else have you had of note?
Well, my first car was a Ranchero.
Nice.
Ranchero. Went through high school and college in that.
What year was that?
Not
69. What year were you in high school and college, but what year was the Ranchero?
It was used. 1969 Ranchero.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
What followed that?
What followed that was my first new car was a Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe.
Yes.
Manual.
Wow.
Yeah, I had that.
Okay. That's eclectic.
Yeah, it had it was a manual. I learned to drive stick driving that thing home from the dealership.
We just had my dad on the show, and he learned to drive manual when he took his Trans Am home from the dealership.
Yeah. So that was, I guess, the first EcoBoost engine, even though they didn't call it that. 2.3 turbo.
Yep.
I found a sweet one.
I wonder if does Bowman still have the Fox body that he was putting it was one of the SHO turbo cars, and he was putting a proper EcoBoost motor in it.
Oh, wow.
I wonder if he still has that.
That'd be an interesting
one. I thought that all went away to fund the 2 years in the Ram.
Right.
I could be completely wrong on that.
So Dan, Zach Bowman. He incidentally, the story we're talking about, he was writing an Autoblog when that story was kind of in process. So to tie this section together a little bit, so you are back on the suspension walk around bandwagon here. Well, not bandwagon. That's not even close to the right word for it. But I think probably what you're most known for on the readership side of things is your deep dives into the suspensions.
Yeah, that started out when Edmunds had Inside Line, and we had a fleet of about 15 or 16 long-term test cars, and all the editors would be driving different things every night. You might drive the same car 3 days in a row or not. But you were expected to produce a blog. Well, ideally, Oldham wanted three a week, but he would settle for 2. Or maybe it was 4 and he would settle for 3. But anyway, it got to a point where it was kind of hard to think up new things that other people hadn't talked about. At that cadence, there'd be 10 people that would complain about the trunk or something on one car. And it's kind of like, okay, we've done this. So I was trying to think of something new to do, and I had a Honda Fit. And I looked at it and I said, I think it needs to have its tires rotated. So I jacked it up in the middle, like I used to do at the racetrack, with a strategic thing that wasn't going to hurt the jacking points. And I got both tires off at the same time, and I thought, So I took a couple pictures of the front suspension and a couple of the rear, because it had that fuel tank under the front seat deal that made the floor.
Oh, did it really? Oh my God.
Yeah. And so
that is not a Honda Fit.
No, it's not. It was something that Dan had jacked up. So
yeah. So I jacked up the front and took a couple of pictures and did the rear, and it was just 4 pictures. And, normally the comments on a long-term blog would be 6 people arguing about how you misspelled something. And the one guy who was the Chevy fan just saying whatever car you were talking about wasn't as good as the Chevy whatever. And it was kind of like really annoying and kind of like not that interesting. And I put those up, and it was like 20 comments, questions, all of them positive, all the BS stopped. And so, but then it's like, this is great, but I don't know what you're talking about. Can you put some arrows or something on there? So if you look, if you look at like any of the pictures that are past the first one, you'll see what I started to do. And I was a Windows person, and I didn't like Photoshop because it's just too top heavy and I only wanted to like resize and put an arrow on. So I had this really cheap freeware program called IrfanView that I used.
I remember that.
And I used arrows with that, and they all look, right out of Minecraft. They're really pixelated.
Well before Minecraft.
Yeah, right. Well, and so I did one of those with the arrows, and maybe 8 pictures this time, and it just took off. So I just kept doing them. And probably at Edmunds, I did probably 85 suspension walkarounds. And
wow,
at one
was that
point,
many?
Yeah, it started out in my driveway, and then at some point they thought, well, let's have the photographers do it on a 2-post lift that we had. And then the pictures were a lot better, but it lost a little bit of its charm, because I think the idea that here's Dan with an SLS AMG in his driveway on a $10 Harbor Freight jack stand was kind of like horrifying and cool at the same time.
Right. It takes the once you have the professional aspect, like even if it's an AMG or, I mean, especially for a Honda Fit, like people drive Honda Fits and race Honda Fits. Yeah, so looking at it that way, you're going, oh, this is what's underneath me, and this is what like eventually I'd theoretically want to replace or do something with, maybe not on the AMG, but.
Yeah, so they were really popular, but then when Inside Line was shuttered, I was told, you know what, we're not in the business of doing enthusiast stuff anymore. We're not going to do these. And so they stopped. And that was probably the last 5 or 6 years I was at Edmunds. It was like that. And we'd get letters to, well, we had a customer service line. Hey, where did those go? I'd get stuff on my social media feeds. What happened to the, suspension walk around? And so, in January, when I find myself looking for another gig, because they laid off 25% of their staff, including me, because I was a high-paid engineer they didn't need anymore. I thought, well, I have a 4Runner, and there are people over at Autoblog that used to work at Edmunds when I did the suspension walk around. Maybe they'll remember. So I called up James Riswick over there, and he was like, oh my God, yes. And then he had to convince his management, and then I just started doing them. And the only thing we changed is, we called it the suspension deep dive, just because it matched up with their search structure on the site, and just to change it up. And I started using Photoshop Lite, so they're no longer the crummy arrows from Irfinview.
They're fancy arrows now. So what so you've probably done I guess close to 100 now, right?
Yeah, there's probably been, I don't know, I haven't counted, 15 or 16 for Autoblog so far.
So right around. So what have been your favorites? At least the most surprising?
Well, the one you had up there a minute ago, the GT500, was kind of interesting. The problem is I tend to remember the most recent thing. There's been some weird ones in the past, like the car I never did that I wish I had done was a Kia Rondo, of all things. Because if you look underneath a Kia Rondo, it looks like the rear control arms and stabilizer bar are bolted to the gas tank, because the gas tank and the rear cross member are one piece.
Oh, that's nuts.
I'm sorry.
If you ever get a chance to stick your head under a Rondo, you won't be disappointed.
Chris, I'm going to look for this too. This is too good. I can't.
I couldn't find a good picture of it, but that was when I worked at Hyundai Kia, which was the job I had between Toyota and Edmunds. And I remember when we first put the first prototype up on a lift, I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. This is either the stupidest thing I've ever seen or the most brilliant thing I've ever seen, because
you're saying
how can I explain this? The mounting points for the rear cross member were the mounting points for the gas tank. The front mounting bolts are 2 feet ahead at the front corners of the gas tank, and the other ones are in the middle.
If you lose one mounting point, you lose it all?
No, it's got
or
4.
they're actually okay.
No, they're big. Most subframes have really nice big bolts. They're not going anywhere, but it's bizarre. And I
can only find like schematics, but
weird images, but I don't know 100% sure if it's a Rondo or not.
I found racing parts for a Rondo, which is even more concerning.
That's not it. No, that's some kind of.
It's Kia.
Some kind of off-roader with a skid plate on its gas tank.
It was from a Kia forum that I got. Kia Sorento.
I don't know. That is something that I seriously never would have expected you to say, though.
But the GT500 was pretty damn cool, because it's got a really interesting rear suspension with an integral link, which makes it look bizarre. I think the I-Pace is another good one that has the same sort of rear suspension, and the I-Pace is really interesting. But the GT500, those carbon fiber wheels, just really amazing. I always put the wheels and tires on a scale because I talk about unsprung mass, and that's one of the big contributors. And they were really light, and I think the rears only weighed half a pound more than the fronts.
That's crazy.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I can't remember any more details than that. It was just
so
cool.
Unsprung mass is something that I in the sports car world, anything related to unsprung mass is bad. Obviously, there's compromises. You get down to a certain point where you lose, structural integrity. But if you can reduce unsprung mass, the more you can do so, the better. Yeah. In the off-road world, when you go into extreme situations where you might be lifting a wheel, is there a benefit in unsprung mass, or is it still just completely all out detrimental?
It's not, there's no benefit there.
None. Okay.
Unsprung mass is just the bad cholesterol of weight. It's not gonna be your friend. And the suspension's gonna have enough of its own mass, even if it's light, to fully droop and drop as far as it's going to in an articulation situation. So I wouldn't say there's a benefit to it there. A really good illustration of how unsprung mass can really create problems or require you to spend a lot of money in suspension upgrades to offset the fact that you have a lot of unsprung mass is a video I did about 3 years ago where we took a Honda Ridgeline out to Death Valley. And the story was, back when the Ridgeline first came out, 2006 or whatever it was, that's about the time I started working at Edmunds. They had a Ridgeline in their long-term test fleet. I drove it a little bit, but it had been around for half a year. And one of the guys, the consumer advice editor, who was a really nice guy, Phil Reed, not your hell-bent for leather type of, send it type of guy, right? Not that at all. He took that vehicle out to the racetrack in Death Valley. And if you don't know what the racetrack is, you might remember it from high school geology. It's this place where the rocks move, and scientists for decades haven't figured out how they move. They had theories. It's a dry lake with big stones that have trails behind them. And to get
Isn't it wind? Wasn't the theory wind?
It's kind of like the peanut brittle theory, I guess is what I would call it, is they get a little bit, in winter, they get a little bit of rain. It freezes. The rocks are frozen into this very thin layer of ice. And then in a short order, it's
blown very slowly across,
it cracks up, and then pieces start to drift around. You have to have wind, and you see these tracks. And that rock is, as big as a laptop and 8 inches tall. There's
probably a 20-pound, probably a 20-pound rock.
Yeah, and you'll see these things all over the place at different places. So anyway, to get there, you have to drive like 100 miles on paved road to get to Ubehebe Crater, which is the northernmost paved paved road attraction. And then from there, you hook south and you go 27 miles on a 2-lane washboard dirt road. Well, it's signed, it's on the map, it's got, there we go. So it's 27 miles of washboard. And so when my colleague had taken the 2006, he went out to the lake and came back. And by the time he got back, as soon as he got on the pavement, the truck's just bouncing around like crazy, and is just totally uncontrollable because that paved road has a lot of corners and dips, when you're coming back from Ubehebe Crater. And so I took it to the dealership, and they said, "What'd you do? Jump this thing? And this is ridiculous." And all the shocks basically had been blown out. They pumped out all their oil past the seals. And so around 2015, the second gen Ridgeline was introduced in, I think, Austin, Texas, or San Antonio, one of those. And I went to that event, and so they had a display of the suspension and how they changed it. And so I started talking to the suspension guy, who turned out to be a guy quite like I had been at Toyota Proving Grounds in the Tacoma days.
That's
and
funny.
We started talking about the changes, and I started to tell him about Phil's experience with the first gen car, and he stopped and he goes, "I know all about it. We actually got a hold of those shocks through the warranty division.
Call back. Yep.
and we actually instrumented the truck and took it out to Death Valley and drove that road and realized that, yeah, this shouldn't have happened. And so the shocks in the second generation Ridgeline have these new amplitude reactive dampers that are supposed to, you know, help with this so that it could kind of float over the washboard. So anyway, I thought, okay, well, I know what I'm going to do as soon as I get a Ridgeline. I'm going to go out there and do that again.
Only one way to find out.
Because I hadn't been to the racetrack yet, and I'd been looking for an excuse to go out there for years, and now here is a perfect one. So I told everybody at work about it, and they're like, oh, I want to go too. And suddenly it's like, oh, let's make a video. And then, okay, so now we bring our Tacoma TRD Off-Road out.
Oh, that video.
Because we had one, and then we had that video. And then we had what's the Nissan Titan XD with the diesel and the Pro 4X off-road package. And that was the one that carried all our gear. And so we went out there, and you can see that road doesn't look too bad. It's no worse than that, but it's 27 miles.
I've driven worse roads than that. Not for 27 miles, but.
That's pretty deep stuff, though. It's a lot worse than it looks there. But anyhow, at about mile 11, we lost sight of the Titan, so we pulled over to wait. And then we started to smell some burning stuff. And it smelled like it was coming from the Tacoma. And I stuck my hand underneath the Tacoma, and both of its rear shocks had exploded. Blew the seals out. There's oil all over the place, and it was kind of burning on the muffler. And
I love that you guys have illustrated all of this for me.
Yeah,
I found the right article.
there's the melted boot. That's the blue boot. It's supposed to be up at the top. There's a bushing there. Well, it's melted and just fallen down.
Oh man!
And there's just oil everywhere. Now, the Ridgeline has like a very, very slight weepage on the right shock and nothing at all on the left shock. And this brings it back to unsprung mass. The Ridgeline being independent suspension, people give it a hard time. Yeah, I mean, you can barely tell, but there's a little bit of oil, a little bit on that shock. But look at this.
Here?
This is kind of down a little lower, just above the control arm. There's a little dark. Yeah, I don't know. This is probably not the best shot to show it, but it wasn't much to begin with. But you can see that this doesn't have a big solid axle. It has just a simple steel lower control arm. It's got that, you know, a smaller wheel and tire. People say it's not an off-road vehicle, but it kicked the Tacoma's butt on a long expedition style dirt road that admittedly didn't have approach and departure angle or articulation issues. It was a dirt road you could have taken a car on. But, you know, the Tacoma, big solid axle, big wheels and tires, kind of the smallest Bilsteins that Bilstein makes. Admittedly, even when I did the original TRD off-road package in 95, we were arguing with the purchasing people that these 36 millimeter ones were too small. We should have the next size up, which is 46. Well, we lost that argument. And then I'd forgotten about it until this moment.
Until this happened.
I said, the biggest thing to me wasn't that they'd blown up. It was that they're still using the 36 millimeter ones.
Oh, it hasn't changed?
Truck. No. And the truck, as you recall, the Tacoma got a lot bigger.
Oh yeah, it's got to be 1,500 pounds heavier.
I think it's 800, but the suspension.
Oh, that's it? Still.
It's not a whole, that's a lot. But yeah, that's a nice, yeah, and we on the way back out, we found out, we saw the oil streak where it had blown up, and it was
really?
And it was only 4 miles from the start.
Oh,
so they didn't last long at all.
And there hadn't been like prior abuse to the truck or anything.
No,
right?
No.
Wow.
No, and so yeah, unsprung mass, not good. Now,
bad.
You know, we went back out with bigger Bilsteins with the remote reservoirs on the rear and bigger ones on the front, and it was perfect. And it was actually really good. So it's just those shocks are undersized. You know, they need to be a little bigger.
Purely cost, pinching pennies, right? At the
yeah. I mean, it was still better. It was still better than the twin tube stuff that came on a regular Tacoma before we did the TRD off-road development. And on anything but this particular circumstance, they work great.
The images of the racetrack are really cool.
They really are.
Yeah, it's worth the trip. And
it's eerie.
It's really kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to get there, it's like I say, 27 miles of washboard. You pass a place called Tea Kettle Junction, which seems to show up in a lot of overland expedition type photo essays.
Yeah. And, so if you had to run back out to the racetrack, what would you take? What new production, like reasonably accessibly priced vehicle would you get into?
Well, I mean, I'd like to try a Gladiator Mojave because of the suspension that it has. I think, all the changes they've made with the remote reservoir and the bigger Fox shocks compared to a Rubicon, I think that is the perfect kind of reason to have those upgraded shocks. A Rubicon, who knows if it would do any better than the Tacoma? It might, but I mean, that car's truck, Jeep, sorry, boy, this jar's really busy.
Yeah, it's something.
It's built for rock crawling, and its shocks are sized accordingly. And this has bigger shocks that have more oil volume, and it's got remote reservoirs, and so that's all meant to deal with washboard and whoop-de-doos and all the repetitive high frequency shock absorber motion that just generates tons of heat. And you just need to get it out of the shock. If you have more oil and a remote reservoir, you just can deal with the heat better.
Right. That's an excellent choice that
I'd like to try that.
But
I also want to try, I think the TRD Pro version of the Tacoma, because it has similar shocks, or TRD Pro. That's kind of the reason that the TRD Pro, you don't really need that kind of shock for rock crawling. It's more for the high speed stuff. It doesn't create that heat. For the washboard. It's for that really high frequency stuff that really just builds up heat in a hurry.
I wonder if they'll build a Mojave Wrangler. That would be kind of kick-ass.
You got to think they
must be.
They've been, I got to think it's...
Isn't part of the Mojave didn't they lengthen the wheelbase?
I don't think the wheelbase is any longer.
No, they moved the shock mount back by a half inch for the rear.
The track is wider.
And they widened the track.
Okay.
The offset of the wheels is slightly different just because the shocks are bigger, I believe. And then the knuckles are cast iron instead of aluminum because they're just thinking of pounding.
Yep.
There, so you trade away a little unsprung mass to get that, but it's for extra durability.
Right. The threshold for aluminum to crack because of abuse is probably quite a bit lower than
and a Rubicon's more of a rock crawler. And at least if they have both, then that's the way you would kind of push people.
That's true. The Mojave did okay.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is I bet you if I put a 4-door Unlimited on the ramp, or even a 2-door, the front tire would probably end up in a similar spot because it's kind of the same suspension. Although this is a Mojave, it doesn't have a stabilizer bar that disconnects. So the Rubicon would go further up because of that.
Right.
For a given suspension configuration, the score on the RTI ramp is how far it goes up the ramp compared to its wheelbase. And so short wheelbase vehicles will score higher, and they do better off-road, just because they can get over things easier.
Just less frame in the way. So, I mean, we've covered a lot. This has been fantastic. I don't even know what else to talk about. But you're one of the few people who have actually added to the show notes, and we always poll for off-roading tips because, I mean, you know the trope about the one thing that car people like to talk more about than their own car is giving other people advice about cars. The thing is, off-roaders generally do share good, constructive, helpful advice that could come into play or, benefit in some way. So you've added some good ones, and they are absolutely true. So I'd love to hear. The first one you wrote is don't start off buying a bunch of stuff.
Right.
Stuff doesn't help.
Right. I mean, that also was true in racing too. You know, the first thing that you want to work on is the nut behind the wheel. You want to, you know, work on your driving. You know, there's a lot of time to be had on a racetrack, or just, you know, the ability to get through problems on an off-road trail just by knowing the line, knowing how to do throttle control right, you know, not ham-fisting it to the point where you break stuff. And so, you know, it's work on, you know, your driving and learn how to read a trail and pick a line. It's kind of the same with autocrossing or anything else. It's the same. It's just a different thing you're trying to accomplish.
My favorite part of your first statement is trusting spotters.
Yeah.
Like that. God. They're literally, they
trust
have
a
the
good,
full view.
An experienced spotter. Yes. Don't trust a new spotter.
Well, you got to get with your spotter too, because different ones have different hand signals.
Yes.
and if you're used to working with one kind of hand signals and the spotter you have is using other ones, or if there's two people, you got to figure out who you're going to watch, because they're invariably going to use different hand signals.
Right. And it's always fun when you have multiple obstacles and your first spotter and your second spotter for the second obstacle, they're doing different things. You're like, what the fuck is going on here?
I mean, the best guys that I found are the Jeep Jamboree guys. They're really good. And, you know, if you go out on Jeep events and they have some kind of an off-road program, you'll see those guys, and they're always excellent as far as
an 04 TJ, and I went to Camp Jeep in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
And it was a new to me Jeep. Like I literally bought it that spring, and I was at Camp Jeep that summer with not a lot of off-road in my background, but I was able to get up a hill and a stock, God, I think I had an X. I think I had an X.
Open
everything, stock Goodyears on it, like nothing attached to it. But I was able to get up a trail while everyone else was having difficulty, because again, I understood throttle control and I paid attention to the spotter the whole time.
Yeah.
I was able to just navigate right up it.
Yep. It's pretty easy. And then, you know, the first mod I would do is tires.
Of course.
Because just like anything, like, you know, you can put stickier tires on an autocross car and go a lot faster there too. It's the same kind of thing. You know, generally your tires that are fitted to like my 4Runner, it's a good all-round tire, and it's probably fine, and they do pretty well off-road. But if I'm going to do something a little bit more aggressive more regularly, then I might choose a slightly different tire. So yeah, tires are always the first mod.
Always.
Searching for pictures earlier, I dug quite a ways through your Twitter timeline, and I got to the same. I know, Ross, you and I talked about this on the podcast last spring. Somebody had commented on KO2s in the mud, and Dan's reaction was exactly the reaction we had. They were like, "You have the wrong tire there."
Yeah, if you're looking for mud, don't get it KO2.
There's a KM3 for that.
Like, there is.
Yeah. I have KM2s on the Jeep, and they actually work really well on the Slick Rock too.
They work great on because I had them on my 4Runner. They wet rocks here. They were amazing.
The biggest problem they have is they're noisy on the street, especially as they wear down.
Yeah,
they get noisier as they wear more.
So bad.
I have KO2s on the Land Cruiser, and I'm starting to get towards the bottom section of tread, and I can tell because it's getting noisier.
Yeah, but they're a little better, you know, they're better all around.
Yeah. I love the KO2s that I have on the Land Cruiser. It's other than the one time I was literally stuck in what was supposed to be a dry riverbed. Yeah.
Not much was making it through that.
No.
I just want to circle back real quick. So for autocross, there's countless, you know, videos and articles and books on how to pick a line and how to set up for a corner and all of that. Do you know of any resources like for picking a line off-road, or is it basically learn by following an experienced wheeler and kind of learning it in the moment?
The problem is, I think you need to you know, be with some people that have some experience, because it's so much more three-dimensional than an autocross course. And, you know, it's it's a little bit harder to generalize how you would approach a particular obstacle, because every obstacle is going to be different. And every vehicle is going to have its own geometry, you know, its wheelbase, how much it articulates, and where the skid plates are and where its vulnerable places are. And you don't have to think of a lot of that stuff in an autocross. It's a lot more of a two-dimensional problem in that sense.
Good point.
So it's knowing your vehicle, I think. So having experience with your vehicle and not going out and trying to do something tough before you've kind of worked your way up to it, that helps. But also, you know, and you shouldn't be out alone anyway if you're going to be on something that might break something. So, you know, you don't really have a reason to not do it that way, because you know, just so you don't get stranded. You know, there should be other people around. And even if somebody isn't a really good driver themselves, I think people sometimes spot better than they drive. So you can still rely on people to tell you, stop, you're going to hit something, you know.
Right.
At least at the minimum level, that's useful.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, there's so many more variables in off-roading than in autocross. I guess for me, in the 4Runner, what helped, thanks, Chris, I knew that was coming.
That tree took off Ross's bumper in the 4Runner.
Yeah, the tree between the side-by-sides was responsible. It was, and I'm going full excuse right now, it was torrential, and I might have been a little hungover and got too close to the tree.
Hung over the side of the trail.
Yeah, exactly. Literally. No, but in the 4Runner, it helped just following somebody with a similar vehicle who had a lot more experience than me, and just kind of seeing how they worked through a trail, and that kind of helped. So then your final tip, tools, the off-road toys.
Right. Well, yeah, there's, I guess, I can't remember, I listed off the height control, which we've already talked about a little bit, where if you have an adjustable height vehicle, don't just automatically stick it in the highest mode you can, because you're going to lose some articulation. You know, keep it in a normal height until you get to a problem where you need to raise it. That's one. The other is if you have a stabilizer bar that disconnects. Now in the KDSS situation, like my 4Runner, this doesn't apply. But if it was a Jeep, I tend to disconnect them as soon as I get off road, as long as it's not going to have any real high speed sections, because it just helps with comfort, because you're not going to get as much head toss as you go over smaller rocks and stuff. So I will disconnect the stabilizer bar in a Rubicon, which is easy to do with a push button. You know, my own Jeep has a pin I have to pull. So as soon as I get off the pavement, I pull that. You know, four-wheel drive. My opinion on this has changed over the years. When I first started doing it, I think a lot of people approach it this way. They leave it in two-wheel drive until they need four-wheel drive, and then put it in four-wheel drive. And they do that until they need low range, and then they put it in low range. I've come around on that. As soon as I get to the dirt, I'll put it in four-wheel drive. And the reason for that is I don't really want to tear up the trail. And I don't want to have a lot of wheel spin unnecessarily. You know, I want to keep the wheels driving the vehicle forward. It helps get through smaller problems that might stop you momentarily. It's just not necessary to, you know, challenge yourself in that way. I mean,
good point.
You can get a long way with clearance, but I tend to just put it in a four-wheel drive mode as soon as I get off the pavement, where I won't have to worry about binding in corners. So that's kind of been my approach. And, you know, my Jeep, because it's a manual, I might even put that in low range before I really need it, because it tightens up the gear spacing, and it makes it easier for me to kind of run the trail without bogging down and having to shift. I can kind of keep it in an RPM range that's pretty favorable. So there's some trails around here that, you know, in an automatic, I would be in 4 high, but in my Jeep, I'm in 4 low, just because of the way that the gearing works out better that way. So that's going to depend on the vehicle, though, and the trail and what you're trying to do.
I think every trail I ran at that Camp Jeep, I ran it in 4 low. But because of that exact issues, they didn't want to wreck the trails more than they had to. And so by everybody being in 4 low, everyone was in slightly more control.
Well, if you're going slow, it's totally fine.
If you're at 50 miles an hour, all of a sudden that's a big difference.
Yeah. And you got engine braking and, all of that is just magnified.
Less abusive on the vehicle too.
Yeah, you can walk down hills without having to use the brakes very much, which is useful because, dabbing the brakes over an obstacle is a sure way to, bash the skid plate into something.
Unsettle
that gets into that throttle and brake control being part of, what you have to really practice. And then, Diff Locks. I wouldn't just lock a diff as soon as I got off-road. I'll wait till I need that.
What's that? I don't know what Diff Locks are.
But, you hear people that'll lock up all three, their front and their rear and their center. It's like,
it's overkill.
Wait until you need it. I'll challenge myself a little bit there. But I don't do the same line of thinking with 4-wheel drive because I'm trying not to tear up the trail.
That's a good point that I think a lot of people are starting to be more conscious of than, say 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That tread lightly starting to come back more and more and more.
It really is, which is a good thing. Totally in favor.
Yeah. I mean, you want to have trails open and, it's the people that tear things up and, go into places that are closed after a rain and then rut up the trail that, now somebody's got to grade that.
We have a local, they call it a trail. It's a connection of dirt roads here. Like we don't actually have actual trails, but there's one section that when it rains, it just goes straight to mud. And there's always somebody, I'll refrain from calling them bad names, that runs it. Like, and every local group that talks about it is like, listen, if it's rained within a week, don't run it. Like we all want to run it again. And some of them are very close to private property and people are getting pissed. Like stop tearing up the road. People are dumb.
Yep. That's why we can't have nice things.
That is true.
But
sweet. Dan, thank you for coming on. It was very nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Dan, thank you. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Guys, I enjoyed it.
What is your social? Can you kind of plug your stuff?
Sure. I have the YouTube channel, which is my name, Dan Edmunds, but also Suspension Tuna, which is also my Instagram handle. So Instagram and YouTube, you can get me the same way there. And someday I'll have shirts. I've got a logo that just started appearing, and I'm going to start doing that, I think. And then Twitter is Edmunds_test, which, there it is.
There's the YouTube.
Yep.
And
I've had that for probably 12 years, but I didn't really get serious about it until about, 6 months ago.
Until COVID.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I was always afraid of being on camera, but in the last couple of years at Edmunds, they actually put me out as talent, and I really got comfortable with doing it. I learned a little bit about it. And so when I, during COVID, and I'm doing the suspension deep dives for Autoblog, I started shooting video versions because people had always asked about it, but I'd never done it.
It is fun to, if you're not used to doing on-camera work, some people look at the camera the first time and completely freeze, and then other people just don't.
That was me.
And I'm a robot where I don't have a soul, and it might be because I taught middle school for 10 years. So like if you put a camera in front of me, I'm going to talk at it like it's a 12-year-old staring at me blankly anyway. Right. Like it's no issues, but I just don't do that kind of work anymore.
The videos are very enjoyable.
Yeah, no, thank you. I had a little break since I put up the last one. It's been a while. The last one really took off. It's like at 850,000 views.
Yeah, it is.
Holy shit.
Can't even believe it.
Because
everything else is like
Heritage.
20.
Yeah, versus the LX.
It gets back to the vehicle you started talking about at the beginning. So if you want to see what a stock one does compared to this Rebel Rally, how is that Rebel, right?
Rebel, yep.
That's it.
Okay. compared to that vehicle, it'll be interesting to see how they do.
It'll be interesting to see how they do in it, because I've also sent the driver or the navigator of that team emails before trying to get them to come on the show. So it is Rochelle Croft, who is married to Clay Croft, who does Expedition Overland and all that stuff.
Yeah, I did it. I was on a 4-day expedition with them once. It was a lot of fun.
Nice. Really?
Nice people.
Yeah, they seem like good folks. We
want
to talk to them on here.
Good time. Yep. Yeah. All right, Dan. Well, thank you again, and you're welcome back anytime you like, obviously. So
thanks very much. Yeah. I appreciate the offer.
Let us know if you have something to plug.
Yeah, and when you start doing more 4Runner stuff, come on and talk more Toyota.
Oh yeah, I'm going to get into this 4Runner. There's going to be a series of things I do to it. There's a lot of people that have done that, but I think I have a little something to offer. That So as soon as I get into that, I'll probably start having a series of those.
Sweet.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.